Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Ask us anything. We hope you guys all came with a bunch of questions this week because we have not a big news week. We're going to discuss a couple of key stories that popped up here throughout the week. And after that, we're going to mostly be taking your guys' questions. So I know a lot of you have been waiting for a big question week. This is going to be it because there's very little in the world of Star Wars news, but some of the topics we're going to run down is George Nolfi, the new writer behind the Rey movie, the third writer we've gotten for this Rey movie, is one of the first writers to come out and like actively talk about writing the Rey movies. So we're going to talk about some of his comments that he made this week about the Rey movie. We also have some subtopics, including Kathleen Kennedy getting an award at Oscar Wilde Awards, Rosario Dawson and Ahsoka winning a Saturn Award, and then the Galactic Starcruiser continues its downfall. It is now completely repurposed into an office building. So we'll talk about some of that fun stuff as well. But the main topic for sure is going to be talking about George Nolfi as the Rey movie continues to pick up steam. And maybe this is a positive sign that there's a writer actually coming public and talking about the movie and that they're actually writing the movie. So that's one of the most positive things we've heard about the Rey movie since maybe it was announced. So hopefully that leads to good things here in the future. But let us know your thoughts on some of these stories as we continue to break them down. We'll incorporate your guys' comments and questions and discussions into our specific topics here. And then we're going to go back and forth between our topics and your guys' comments and questions and theories. Like we kind of started last week, for those of you who weren't here last week, just to give everybody a chance to give a few questions on tonight's stream and on every stream. We're going to take the first couple from each person, go down, and once we get through everybody's, then we'll come back up to the top and take the second or the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh questions from everybody else who usually comments a lot. So we do want you to comment a lot. We want to encourage you to comment a lot, but we are going to try to just include everybody's voice since there are a lot of people who aren't able to show up until right when the stream starts or show up a little bit later into the stream. Want to give everybody a chance to get their voice on the stream. As always, though, if you have a comment you desperately want on the show and it's looking like we're running behind, or you just want to support the show in general, super chat is greatly appreciated. It does get your comment bumped up to the top. We will answer it before anything else. So that is a way you get your comment on the stream. The other way is join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs. If you're at the $5 tier, you do get priority chat access, and we will answer your questions first if you're on those tiers. So check out Patreon. You can comment on the link there to tonight's stream. Put your comment down below in that link, and we will answer it on the stream or comment here, and we know which members are of that tier. So we will make sure we get to your question as well. All right, without further ado, let's get into the first topic here. And as I teased off the top, new Jedi Order writer George Nolfi speaks up on his approach to Star Wars and the upcoming film. This is pretty exciting, as last week we talked about the fact that he is hired as the new writer of the new Jedi Order Rey movie, which has lost two writers previously. Really, one writer for this version of the movie. The original version of the movie was created and was going to be directed and written by Damon Lindelof, who left the project before the creative team that we know of, Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy and Daisy Ridley, all even got on board with the project. So this is technically the second writer of this version of the story, and he talks about coming into a project that's already well on its way, because we speculated in the past a lot about what does it mean for Simon Kinberg's trilogy, which is supposedly going to be using Rey. A part of his story is his trilogy, the next sequel trilogy, or is it just a series of movies that he's making that coincides with New Jedi Order? Is New Jedi Order a prequel to that? Are his movies going to be in any way connected to the Rey movie, or are they going to take place immediately after the Rise of Skywalker and build up to the Rey movie? So there's a lot of questions around that, but we do know that the project isn't completely changing. Last week, Sanak and I both talked about the fact that one of the reasons you let go of a previous writer, maybe pick up a new writer, is the fact that they decided to just add this trilogy in. Doesn't mean they're completely starting over. Well, George Nolfi clarifies that they are not starting over. He says, "The way I approach it is you look at what's come before you and you look at the broad issues of what they want to do, meaning Lucasfilm, Disney, Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, and then you do what a writer does and try to put beats of story together. Try and imagine characters, and then you present that with an understanding that it needs to honor, obviously, a long, incredible tradition," in reference to Star Wars. So that's George Nolfi's approach to the movie. I mean, I think it's positive overall, Sonic, when you hear those comments that they're not starting over. I think that is a positive for at least getting this movie sometime in the next like 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Because originally this was supposed to be a 2026 movie when they announced it in 2023. And now we're coming up to 2026 in a year, and there's no way this movie comes out in 2026. So it's been replaced by The Mandalorian. So when you hear those comments, what are your thoughts in general about George Nolfi's approach and the way Lucasfilm, Charmene, Kathleen Kennedy, they're all approaching this project now on its second full-time writer?
I mean, again, it is still definitely a wait and see sort of situation. Can't claim anything about it being locked in or, 100% fundamentally on track to deliver everything that it's been promising to be, especially with the talent attached to it. Charmin is no slouch as an Oscar-winning documentary director. She's got some taste with franchises with, Miss Marvel and those episodes there. We got Lindelof with his very esteemed TV like legacy, right, with Lost and everything, and Watchmen TV series. And then you got Stephen Knight, obviously with Peaky Blinders. That obviously took a little bit more of his time this year too, or this past year. So I can understand why he might have even been a little bit more compelled than the other writers to kind of step away. And now we've got someone that we know that has had a lot of experience, with like the Bourne Ultimatum, a lot of sequel stuff. And to me, he's saying all the right things. It very much seems very much steeped in his sequel-ish philosophy of like always making sure to build off of what is there. That is a fundamental thing with Star Wars. Always introduce new ideas, but don't disregard the old ones. And I think that's one thing that I'll always have a bit of a criticism for with The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, The Force Awakens. They kinda came into this period of time where Star Wars is like, "No, go back to what it was." And then after that kinda came out and everyone was happy with that, like, we went back to the old, everything's great. Then The Last Jedi is like, "Well, we have to push further," but without having actually built up what was there with the prequels already established, and obviously the original trilogy being the direct, uh, prequel to Episode 7. It does make the film feel pretty, like, okay, like, what are you trying to say? Like, there is definitely a lot of political metaphor that I think has aged fairly well. I'm not gonna deny that, but I think in some ways, like, I'm like, "Well, what do we know about the galaxy? What do we know about these characters? Why is Luke all this and that?" And instead, we got a mystery box with JJ, right? And that'll always be frustrating to me as someone who once used to be a lot more positive about his filmmaking, and now I'm a lot more mixed. That was always something that felt a bit concerning to me, and it's only aged poorly. So hearing someone say that, like, whatever has already been attached to this project, attached to Star Wars since Disney, since George Lucas, even. And yes, some quotes on George Lucas and a lot of the
Mhm,
political metaphor, the mythology all kind of combined together there. He's saying all the right things to me, right? It always felt strange that the sequel trilogy didn't have anything from the prequels. I would almost feel like after the Empire kind of shuns everything with the prequels, sheds it away and all that, the people who rise up are the people who remember the prequels, right? The people who fight back, and they might try to inject that and see what fuses and changes. And we've seen that in some interesting stories like Bloodline and everything, but we never really saw that in the movies. So yeah, I'm excited from what I'm hearing. It seems like he really wants to continue pushing the foundation that is already there, with the film, with what Star Wars has been from its inception, and truly deliver the best film he can. And if his role is just to polish things up to make things a little bit better aligned with this new trilogy, with the future prospects that have been determined for Rey's story, that's he's saying all the right things to me. Honestly, I'm pretty
mhm,
excited. Plus, he also is like the biggest film that I could want as a Star Wars fan is like a film with everything after post Return of the Jedi, a sequel to Return of the Jedi, right? And while that may not be the Mandalorian Grogu necessarily, that is something that has become a bit of a prospect for me, like, a little bit like a, "Okay, that'll be fun for people to get back and get, like, a little bit of the vibes there, the hype of those older longtime fans, see how the prequels, which have definitely influenced The Mandalorian and everything, can kinda come a little bit more forward to general audiences, and then by the time this Rey film comes out, we'll be a little bit more ready for like, okay, let's build out the sequels, let's build out the future. Now that we've gotten a taste of that, now that we know that both of those things are being achieved at the same time.
Right, and I think he is saying the right things. I mean, but that even that short quote, I mean, confirms so many things, not just that they're
Yeah.
latched onto a direction, which is what one of my biggest concerns has been through this whole saga, these last 2.5 years, 2 years since this movie was announced, is that they can't decide on a specific direction. At least this seems like they actually have decided on a direction. And one of the other things I've been concerned about, and he reconfirms it here, I'm not going to say this is, gospel. This very well could change, but Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy is still attached as the director, which we haven't been sure if that's the direction because they've changed writers so many times. If the story keeps changing, it's hard to keep a director you signed for one vision on for your 10th version of the script, right? So that in a hypothetical world, if they kept firing and hiring writers, it's going to get so far away from the original intent when you hired a creative team that it might not even be, you know, in the wheelhouse of the person you hired on, or even in the sensibilities or desire of the person you hired on to actually want to create this film. So I think that's a big positive for at least getting this movie off the ground, and the overall quality of it is that they have a consistent vision. It's just not reaching really from what he says the exact beats they want via character. So it sounds
Mhm.
like the story overall is kind of set. It's just they're hoping to get some better moments for the characters, better, more impactful, more important things for the specific characters that are involved. So that's always a positive when you hear that they're trying to improve the movie rather than come up with the movie. And that's something that was big to me reading that. But I did want to talk about his second quote too, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I think it means a lot when we're talking about the overall state of what this movie is, because we still don't really know anything about it other than what they told us in 2023, which is they're calling it New Jedi Order, takes place 15 years after Rise of Skywalker, and it's about Rey trying to rebuild the Jedi Order. That's it, and that's a pretty loose description because we know nothing about the villains, we know nothing about the time period, nothing about the politics, nothing about every other character besides Rey. So there's a lot of open-ended stuff around this project, and he does kind of clarify a little bit of what direction he wants to take it as the writer. He says, quote, if you think about George Lucas, the 6 movies that he did, the universe he created, it's actually very steeped in broad notions of politics. It's not talking about today per se, but there's the empire's Nazism slash Roman Empire, the democracy of the Roman Empire collapsing and becoming an empire, and the perennial story of human beings organizing themselves and against chaos, and then the tools that help human societies tamp down on chaos becomes oppression. So that is really very to the very core to what I think George Lucas was talking about. And one of the wonderful things about science fiction and Star Wars, which is more almost science fantasy or space opera, is that you can raise the deepest issues without it feeling like a philosophy class or a political science class or something I read in the newspaper today. So to me, that is also kind of a positive quote because one of the things we've talked a lot about on this movie and it just in general, like you were mentioning with the sequels earlier, is their complete apathy for trying to build a world. It's been all about good guy versus bad guy, and then you have the force in between, right? It is an original trilogy approach, but what George did in the original trilogy was he created something new. He built up this world and he added to it in each movie. What they did in the sequels really was like, let's just do a new version of what he did. And then by making The Last Jedi take place hours after The Force Awakens, it was hard to build up the world much more. It kind of was the same thing. And then The Rise of Skywalker continues a year after. They never really went into the politics or the world building at all. They just went into good guys versus bad guys. So to me, this quote's positive because at least he's looking at it from by talking about government and politics, He's working looking at it from a world building perspective. What is he gonna
Yeah.
do? What's he gonna establish? What are the governments gonna be like in this story? How does this classic style Star Wars storytelling, the classic motifs of oppression and governmental oppression, juxtaposed with the story they're trying to tell in an era where Rey is trying to rebuild the new Jedi Order. I think that's something that's kind of at the core of what they have to establish. Now, it can be simple, right? It can just be everything's great. The New Republic is doing well, or the New Republic is doing well, and everybody's happy. Okay, that's fine too. If they're going to do an invading force from another galaxy, but don't do the Empire versus the Republic again. And I think that's my only concern from reading this quote is that if a lot of the roots of what he's talking about, George Lucas's movies, the Imperial versus Republic, the comparing it to traditional world history, if you're looking at all of it that way, I don't want another empire coming back. I don't want to fight, excuse me, the same old villains we've done over and over and over again. So I hope he takes some of these motifs, some of the way George Lucas looked at history and applied it to his stories and builds on that, creating a new villain and new factions and new politics to enhance this world. And I think he kind of grasps that in this quote.
Yeah, I mean, I think he gets a lot of it, right, just in these quick statements that he's saying, right? I was never under the impression that you're gonna hire a writer, completely change everything, and then have somebody at this point, and with how little confidence there is in this film being made, to just be like, "Yeah, I'm trying to go with something completely new, just my own fandom of Star Wars kind of blended in here." No, he's saying all the right things to me that seems to be like someone who's well aware of some of the struggles this film has had to get off the ground, and actually understanding where some of the fandom lies, right? Like, not talking about people who are extremely like, "Oh, I'm super happy about where Star Wars is," or people who are like, "No, this is the worst thing ever. Every year it gets worse." There are people who like us who just are genuinely asking, like, where are we going with this? Like, what is the direction of the franchise? Are we gonna continue to treat the sequels as like, oh, that didn't really work out, let's forget about it? Seems like this year, because of 10th anniversary, they're pushing into gear. We've got some new things. I mean, we could even talk about this later, but there's the Path of the Lightsaber manga that's kind of happening here, and that's some pretty big news, right? How does that tie to the Kylo Ren Legacy of Vader comics? 10th anniversary continuations will probably happen. Maybe we'll get like a Lost Stars sequel announced or something at Celebration. Like, there's a lot of things that can happen, right? Just this year to push the sequels ahead. But I do get, like, a little bit of that concern of, like, are we really just jumping into another fight against the same sort of enemy that's always been codified and just kinda changes and reflects a little bit more, like, modern stuff, right? And then but blended in with some ancient Roman Empire, Greek tragedy, or something like that. I'm not 100% sure that'll happen. I think I'm a little confident it won't, simply because seeing how that this is still set seemingly 15 years past the sequels, even if you wanna do even like a Bantam era-esque storytelling with Rey and all these other new Jedi and different governments or whatever, that's still 15 years. That's a plenty of time to kinda get these extremist remnants, like, changed into, like, a small, insane fascist force that maybe has some sort of presence, but isn't anything, powerful or harmful in the way that it could have been, right? Or maybe, like, this time there's, like, a little bit more of an emphasis of, like, this time they're for sure gone, so whatever rises up is a little bit more steeped in something way older than even the prequels or the High Republic, maybe something traced to the Old Republic and stuff like that. Because there's always huge synergy between very different eras. I wouldn't mind if the further we go into Star Wars, the more interesting things we kind of pull out from even further back in Star Wars, right? So I think there's a lot to be, hopeful for. I think that at the end of the day, though, these are a couple of short thoughts about like where the film is going. He's already given us a lot. I'm not gonna like fault him if something just seems a little too similar because hey, at the end of the day, you still have to work in that same sandbox. If that's kind of where that film is maybe lacking some of its punches, maybe it feels like it's leaning into a direction that a future film or future stories will eventually be like, "Oh, Empire 3, eh, don't want that," right? So, maybe that's where he's kinda coming from. He's just kinda, like, subconsciously talking about, like, where that's some of the early pitfalls of this film are so far. but maybe because he's kind of putting that out to light that, "Hey, I'm working on it," and a year or 2, when we first see our first trailer or something or behind the scenes, we'll be like, "Yeah, that feels similar, but definitely different than what we were kinda built up throughout the sequel trilogy." So, I'm still very reasonably excited about someone who feels like they're talking about Star Wars and kinda where a lot of people like you and me are like, "Well, where are we going truly?"
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing is just knowing that this project's actually in motion. It's not just something that they're tossing around. They're actively trying to get this going. And that's all we can hope for at this point with the track record we've had is just that they try to get these projects off the ground. And this is something that I think is positive. And with his background mostly being kind of political thrillers, I mean, you would
Yeah,
imagine he's thinking a lot about the socio-political angle of Star Wars because that's something that drives the storytelling he's done in the past. And so it really could be somebody who's there just to beef up the world and to create a nice foundation that maybe they can build off here in the future. But what do you guys think of this story? Are you excited by the comments that George Nolfi makes about the Rey movie? Do you think, who cares because it's never gonna happen anyways? That's fair too. Let us know in the comments. We do have a few comments about this project here with Critical Thinker who says, I have no expectations for the Rey movie, but if he wants to include politics, that is definitely a plus after the sequel trilogy basically ignored all of that, and as a result, none of the war made any sense. And we basically just talked about that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a positive to include politics because politics and governments and all of that stuff is at the heart of any type of world building you would do for anything. You would have to establish the hierarchy and the way everything works. And so if there are no rules, if there's no factions, then it's really hard to make it all connect. And I think the way The Force Awakens throws you into the conflict is very reminiscent of A New Hope. It can do that, but it was kind of leaving it up to the other two movies to figure out, okay, what's the structure and how does this all really work together? And both originally Ryan Johnson and then originally Colin Trevorrow and then J.J. Abrams, nobody really had interest in really developing that point. They had more interest in continuing the story. And yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the things, right? Is George Lucas throws you into the action in A New Hope, but it's the same guy on board writing all three movies. And that ultimately is what makes it all connect and work as he continues to come up with new ideas and build and crisscross versus the sequel trilogy. A lot of different voices in there, a lot of voices that were changed and rewritten and changed again. So, yeah, hopefully they've learned from their mistakes in the past and they're focused on really locking us into a world, especially if they're making more than one movie.
yeah, yeah. And I think it brings up another good point about, like, yeah, we all kind of feel it as time goes on, like, where is, like, the political reasons behind everything? Because at the end of the day, yes, it is a huge extremist terrorist attack that destroys the government, topples it over, right? And that's pretty solid as a start. You don't really need much more than that, because it's kind of the inverse of what we get in, you know, Rogue One kind of changes a little bit, but at least in A New Hope, you're like, "Okay, they've had some secret plans to this extremely important thing," and then you see it actively used on Alderaan, and you're like, "Oh, like, no wonder people are going crazy about this. This will literally change any and all resistance to and make it futile," right? This film, The Force Awakens, even if it does happen at, like, a similar junction in the film, it topples everything because the good guys are the ones that are technically in power. Even if they're struggling, you don't understand why you're struggling. And again, I've talked about it on so many lives. It's such a disgrace in my mind that the Corcella scenes are just absolutely cut out. She plays a pretty important role in Bloodline. She has, like, one little cameo just to see her die. I'm like, "Okay, why do I care about this, like, one zoom into this character?" It's like, "Okay, it's a nice Dutch angle. Maybe they're the closest to the camera. That's how it's supposed to read." But then when you see those scenes, you see how, you know, Padme's influence on whatever politics that her daughter Leia underwent, and then her own experiences in the Galactic Civil War, and then, the hints of, like, what's going on and her reputation in the last 30 years in the New Republic, that was all conveyed there. it was all conveyed there, and I think you would have had The Force Awakens actually be one of the more potent films of the entire 9 films to talk about, like, politics directly, to have someone who was kinda now become, like, a bit more of an outspoken extremist in some people's eyes, but only because everyone thinks she's cuckoo and crazy when the fact is everything's kinda lock jams, and the New Republic before it gets destroyed, like, that's such important context. That's why Bloodline is so good. It just dives into all of that that's necessary. But why wasn't even that small little bit with Corcella there? It's a perfect continuation. I think even the novelization basically makes it canon, right? So it's like, why was that not in the film? It's not like the film was gonna be hurt by a 2-minute scene. That film is quick and breezy. It really enjoys its pace. It's super well paced. Having a small little bump for politics like that would have been fine. It's not the same as, the Phantom Menace where you have the politics stuff happening in the Senate, and it's actively important, but it does take a while to get going once they're on Coruscant. It's just little, like, hints at, like, the state of the galaxy in The Force Awakens. So I'm always gonna be disappointed by that, but it also does make me think, we know with Bob Iger's biography and everything, he does say, like, I told him, like, every film has to come out every 2 years. That's not a typical thing for Star Wars. Star Wars had at minimum 3 years. If anything, it was closer to 4 the way George Lucas was filming and working on pre-production during, like, the post-production of the previous film and all that. He had time to think about every detail. JJ is an incredible filmmaker on delivering something that looks incredibly cool and looks well shot and all that. But he maybe needs more time in almost every film that I think that he's put out. I think maybe the most potent one that he had is Mission Impossible 3, and he was basically told to do it differently than the first 2. So, he kinda got away with a lot of that, but even then, a lot of people say, "Ah, you're missing some of the, like, world building. You're missing some of the details," and I think that is a absolutely fair criticism of him. He loses these things. I wonder if he got the 3 years instead of the 2 years and kinda less, that Bob Iger kinda mandated, if that would have been more of a consideration, like, "Oh, maybe, we're losing out on some of the Leia political angle, which was always there. It was always potent for her as a character, but never really gonna be useful in the context of the original trilogy. Why don't we, like, bring it up here as the resistance leader? Why is she not working from within the system and all that?" Those are some questions I think could have been thrown around, but never really got a chance. That another year of, like, having coming around, circling back to that, could have implemented it to the film. So, Bob Iger also says The Rise of Skywalker, I wanted that out ASAP. They wanted it out in 2020. He didn't let them delay it, even though Carrie Fisher passed away, and it changed everything with Trevor to JJ. I wonder just how much of that film could have been longer, could have tied in all the loose ends of The Last Jedi, The Force Awakens. It's also just frankly just a matter of, like, we rushed through the sequels when we didn't necessarily have to, right? Like, we could have had a little bit more of revision for every film, at least make it feel better. It feels like 3 solid to great films, but doesn't necessarily feel like a solid trilogy, and that's what's making the work on the Rey New Jedi Order film, the future of Rey's character arc, all these other side projects, animation, live action, whatever, so much more important because they're gonna all kinda have to do what the Clone Wars did for the prequels, which at the end of the day still had a strong bones and direction, at least between 2 and 3, for where the story's going and an endpoint in sight.
Very all those points are very true, and I think, the sequel trilogy, one of the other problems with it is Star Wars, or at least maybe Disney at the time, they weren't used to the general bashing and criticism that is felt within the Star Wars fandom.
Yeah.
The stuff that Lucas was dealing with for 10 plus years at that point, they weren't used to that. I mean, at that point when they bought Lucasfilm, they had Avengers come out, which was the first Marvel movie that they made went fully as Disney Marvel, because the other movies they released, Thor, Captain America, Iron Man 2, because they bought it in 2010, Marvel, those were all made by Paramount first. So then they have this big hit. It's Avengers. It's the biggest hit of all. Really, they're not doing anything wrong. They had never had that type of adversity. And I think with Star Wars, I mean, they acquired it in October 2012. By 2013, they were already getting it into production, pre-production. They had a director, they had writers, and everybody on board. By 14, it was almost done filming. By the end of the year, they had a teaser trailer out. So it was pretty accelerated. And The Force Awakens is a movie that feels like it because what they did was they latched on to what do people love about the core DNA of Star Wars? And I don't think that was a bad approach. But then they also kind of tried to roll with each punch that was thrown at them on
Yeah.
top of using that kind of core hatred of the prequels at the time as a backbone. And so everything was changing, everything was in flux, and it's just a it's a learning process. I mean, it's disappointing in a lot of ways to a lot of different people, but it is something they had to learn and grow with. And you're seeing them learn and change with Marvel right now as well. So I don't know. It's all interesting. Anthony sent us a super chat. Thank you so much for supporting the show tonight, Anthony. Anthony said, one thing I've been struggling with that you guys have helped me with is my self esteem because for so long I have let toxic people online tell me that I can't like what I want. Well, we're glad you enjoy our content and that you feel like you can voice your opinions on here, Anthony, because we want you to have a very high self esteem. Your opinion's just as important as our opinion. We might disagree, and we love discussing Star Wars with you. And we're glad you join us every week to discuss and let us know what you think. Never change or back down. You can always change your opinion. You can if be able to see things in different ways. Everybody, I mean, especially with Star Wars, right? We all watch it so many times. You can have a different opinion on it almost every time you watch something or read something or whatever, but or play something. But don't let other people's opinions dictate your opinions. Have your own experience with it, and your experience is just as credible as everybody else's.
Yeah, I echo a lot of all those sentiments, and yeah, I mean, I'm glad that we can play a small part in helping you there. That's definitely important. Build yourself up. Well, everything's going around in the world, and as much as all the world can be overbearing, sometimes it is really just the smaller things that you take for granted, like looking up social media and all that, that can make a bigger difference, have a bigger impact on your health. I mean, everything is trying to grab our attention these days. Like everything about the human experience is up for sale in bite-sized parts. So yeah, I mean, that's in some ways the nice thing about live streams is that you see us flaws and all. We might stutter a little bit, we might change our conversation a little bit. Both of us are very verbose, but we're talking to you straight as if you're here, like we have like an audience. Like we're not sugarcoating it. We're not that type of people, and we won't ever be. And I'm glad that we've been helpful for you. But yeah, I mean, your opinions of Star Wars are always valid, right? If I don't love someone's opinion in the chat, I'll also tell them, right? If I love someone's but maybe other people are drowning out, I'll support them. But the fact is, I'm not trying to put down anybody, right? I'm just gonna be honest about it, and I think that's what we've spent so much time crafting in this space. And I'm glad that it's having some positive repercussions on your health and maybe those around you too. So glad to hear that. Let Star Wars be a place for you to enjoy and have your own little corner at all times. It's so big and vast, right? It's a galaxy. It's incomprehensible for people, right? But there can be a story in every little particle of the galaxy. That's how capable this franchise can be, and that's why we all, have fairly high expectations, even if we're not expecting like a Christopher Nolan HBO level quality for every little thing. We're just hoping that there is consideration, there is a direction, and we're hoping that the fans are both happy for it and don't feel like they're being attacked for any sort of opinion, as long as it's and done with fair and true love for the fandom and the franchise.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with all of that. And then Anthony also adds in another comment after that saying another problem with the sequel trilogy was that JJ was asked to do all three, but he turned it down. And I think that was, I mean, it's a problem, and I agree with you. It's something that's not talked about much, which is actually is a fair thing to discuss, is that they did actually try to offer it to somebody to create this plan initially. Um, but I think the one thing that's not super fair to like blame JJ for that is that he turned it down early enough in the process for them to find enough people to get on board and create an entire plan for the trilogy. It wasn't like he was supposed to do it, and then like 2 weeks before the Force Awakens comes out, he's like, "Actually, I'm not going to do the rest of them. Find somebody else." So he turned it down. He didn't want to do it before they even made the Force Awakens. So I think that's it's certainly a factor. I don't know if it was one of the contributing problems to the overall sequel trilogy, but it would have been ideal if somebody came in. I think especially retroactively when we see the fact that he came back to do Rise of Skywalker, then it seems like, well, why, he should have done all three. But at the time, he either didn't have the ideas or didn't have the passion to really pursue it. And it is kind of interesting too, because one of the things they always, or Kathleen Kennedy always said, was the question that got JJ on board was when she asked him when he was interviewing for the job, she asked him to tell her who is Luke Skywalker and who is he now? What does he do? And JJ completely dodges that question in The Force Awakens. He puts him on an island somewhere and then doesn't talk about him the entire movie, right? He's just this myth. And that's, I guess, was his answer. It's interesting that that kind of led to him getting the job. So you would imagine he must have had some ideas, but yeah, the whole process is interesting. Hopefully they figure out a way to course correct it. And I think to their credit, you're seeing the course correction you in the MCU right now. It hasn't really gotten a chance to start, but I thought Fantastic Four looks really great, and I think they're starting to try to figure out a path. You're seeing them take years. At this point, it will be 7 years between The Rise of Skywalker and The Mandalorian to figure out their strategy and their path. They don't do everything perfectly, but I think they listen a little bit more than people, I think, give them credit for, because otherwise they would continue to fall apart. And they've adapted and changed some things. I mean, you look at MCU from 2013 to where it was in 2017, 2018. It was completely different. They changed based on criticism. So hopefully they listen to it now. I think we just live in a day and age when people are, at least creatives, tune criticism out more. Hopefully executives at least listen to it and try to find what the market demands. But let's move to the top here, get back into the chat, and we're going to go into our other topics here in a little bit. Let's try to get into the chat here, and I'm going to post a question right now for you guys. I want to do some of these polls on the chat every single week so we can get your guys' opinions on our big topics. And the question is going to be, when will the Rey new Jedi Order movie actually come out? And you have three options here, or four options here, excuse me, and you can vote on them. We'll let you guys know the results at the end of the stream. But yeah, let us know in the comments here what you guys think will be the case. All right, back to the top. We have Anthony, who says, I hope I'm not asked too many questions. You have not, Anthony. We love your questions. Again, I don't know if you saw the post I made last week or listened to the show. I know you said you weren't here for the show last week. But we want you guys to ask questions. We encourage as many questions as possible. We want to get to as many as possible. We've only got so much time to work with. We have a lot of fans here, so we want to focus on, or give everybody a chance to voice their opinions on the news or whatever our topics are, get their questions in instead of just the people who are able to show up the earliest. But we do appreciate you showing up early, and we do appreciate your comments, and we want to answer all of them. So just clarifying that again, because I don't want people to think they shouldn't send in more than two questions. We would love you to send in more than two questions. Anthony says, I don't know if you got to my questions last week, but just to recap, do you think Mace Windu, when he redirected the lightning, we did actually get to all your questions, I believe, because you left them pretty early. But I guess to recap about the Mace Windu one, no, I don't think it completely revealed his true appearance. I think it is mostly damage from the lightning. I think part of the reason he lets the lightning bounce back at him is to show the horror that the Jedi are inflicting upon him physically to Anakin. I think if Anakin's not there, he probably doesn't let that happen, because he's playing the defenseless old man in that moment. But I think, maybe he's a little uglier underneath the Force than
Yeah.
we see. And I think part of his his true appearance is that he's revealing, how hideous Sidious actually is, in his heart, kind of thing. I think that's what George is really going for, is that this, terrifying looking person is the one who's able to take control of the entire galaxy. And even though it's right in front of you, how scary this guy is, nobody can do anything about it. So that's really, I think, what he's really going for. But um, I do like that idea. I mean, Stover in his book, he poses a lot of different kind of hypotheticals and theories, and I think all of them are pretty good. I mean, they're all fun to listen to. I mean, we got the Sith shriek and stuff from from the novelization. He tries to really give some justification for almost all of the like things that might be glossed over or not make much sense in the movie. So I think that's really what he's doing there.
Yeah, it's all those things, and I do wanna point out that a big thing, especially in anything besides Sidious's depiction for a lot of these Sith lords, when they're doing spiritual, like, arcane magic and stuff like that, they look terrible. They look like someone who's been, like, on a bender and awake for 7 days and cut themselves up and all that, like, they got red eyes and, like, red blood and everything, like, yeah, they don't look good, right? Forget about the yellow eyes. That's, like, probably the nicest thing that they have. It's like, "Ooh, shiny," but everything else about their skin, oh boy, they do not look great. So, yeah, basically everything what Liam said. Um, just how much of that, like, was is, like, how he looks like when he's performing some of these crazier arcane things, and how much of that is the damage, that's kinda where the nuance lies for both of us. But, yeah, for the most part, don't wanna, like, downplay what Mace did. He still beat, Palpatine, even if Palpatine kind of maybe slowed down and anticipated some things happening once he, like, senses, Anakin's emotions running into the room.
Anthony also says, "Do you guys think it's possible that there are multiple chosen ones?" Oh, yes, I do remember this question. Who
Oh.
destroyed the Sith in legends such as Keltroma, Revan, Satil, Jaina, and Cade. And then says Darth Malga says officially become my fourth favorite Sith Lord. Who are your first three favorite Sith Lords? Is it Vader, Maul, and Sidious? I would guess, or maybe Bane or Dooku is in there. Anyway, back to the chosen one question. Personally, I don't buy into that, especially because the Sith are never destroyed by Ulick or Revan or Satil or I mean, even Jaina and Cade, they fight offshoots versions of the Sith. So the only time when really the entire Sith Order was defeated for a significant period of time was Anakin. And I buy that. I only think there can be one chosen one. Like if we've said many times on these streams in the past, there can be people who the Force elevates to rise as a champion. Like if you're looking at Greek mythology, there are plenty of heroes who rise up to be the defenders of the humans. Fighting monsters and all that type of stuff. There can be people who are granted incredible ability in order to champion the good or the bad. But I don't think they're necessarily the chosen one. And I know we've talked a lot about on these streams what the chosen one actually means. And I won't, repeat it for everybody unless you guys want us to. But I do think a lot of it is spiritual. It's destroying the Sith, bringing balance. It's a spiritual balance. And the destruction of Palpatine and Vader, it puts the galaxy at peace, and I think that's what George was looking at, mostly with that. So, no, I don't buy that any of them are chosen ones, and especially Revan, Satil, Ulick. They didn't destroy the Sith. Like the Sith just keep going in that same time period. So they might
Yeah.
defeat a major Sith, and then a next one comes. At least with Cade, we don't know what happens really after that, um, with the Sith. So maybe he defeated them once and for all. Jaina, we know more rise up in a different faction. So I don't think any of them did what Anakin was able to do.
It's yeah, it's a weird one. I mean, like some people are saying, chosen one, singular, right? So it should only be Anakin, right? And I think trying to remember some of my points that I made, like I agree with a lot of what Liam was saying. If I would say, like, yeah, the Force maybe like enhances certain Jedi or certain Force users to carry the light to counter the darkness that has risen up, especially over the period of the Old Republic, right? There's so many different Jedi who aren't necessarily like super powerful, but they make some big hits against the Sith, like the darkness and corruption of the galaxy. All right. I wouldn't say Cade Skywalker is necessarily a chosen one. He's got some incredible abilities, but if you put him in a room with Anakin and Luke and all these other, even his predecessors, right? He might like do alright, but nothing special to me. And some of that comes from the fact that he has a fairly short, relatively short like journey as a character. We only kind of see him when he picks it up again, and then nothing else. Kind of like how Revan does. So yeah, I think chosen one should be Anakin. I've said that I've always found that a little bit of a difficult, like, old school fantasy concept to fit into Star Wars, especially because it becomes, like, a very, like, Christian allegory too, and I don't think that anything in the original trilogy really implies that, like, George Lucas was actually super into, like, putting that like, obviously, he blended Hinduism, he blended, Taoism, Buddhism, a lot of European history, and all that together to create Star Wars, but I never really saw, like, Anakin the way he's talked about in the original trilogy as, like, someone who was conceived by the Force as something to rise up against Plagueis just as he's about to unlock the secret of creating life, right? To cheat like the natural order of things. So I think that's where he's more chosen. It's like the Force being like, oh, we have to step in. Now. No more like enhancing, no more like elevating or enhancing these good people doing the right thing. Like we're about to. It's like this is the end game. If we don't do anything now, yeah, treating the Force as a person here. Like if the Force doesn't do anything now, then like the whole balance will be forever lost and destroyed. All right. So that's why Anakin kind of rises up. And I think I like that interpretation a little bit more than just being like, oh, it just happens and it was great. Like it it doesn't always sync up for me, honestly, but I think I always think about it a little bit more and I'm like, yeah, that matters more to me. So yeah, I mean, I think you can say that there are people who have been chosen for certain tasks throughout history to like bring back the light or like keep the darkness at bay. But Anakin is the one who like finally destroyed everything, right? Like, unfortunately, destroyed the Jedi, but he did destroy the Sith. And even then, like, how much of that in Legends and canon really holds, right? At least you can argue that canon has at least pushed it out 30 something years before a Palpatine really has a role in it. In the EU, it's like 9, 10 years after Return of the Jedi. It's like, oh, he's been trying. He's it implies that he's had this body and multiple bodies over so many countless years, right? Which, doesn't line up with the prequels as we know it now. So it's hard to put down Sidious. It's hard to put down the Sith. Chosen one is just Anakin, but there are individuals that kind of go up, and the Force does some interesting things with them. The way to make the chosen one in some ways retroactively feel more special again to me is to kind of go with stuff like the Force diet, to go with like different interesting named concepts that do different things with the Force, and that still allowed the chosen one to just be like the highest midichlorian count, the highest force potential being, and then the diet is like, oh, there's like some very interesting synergy between these two beings that kind of blend their light sides and their dark side together. Not gray Jedi, but like their halves and their personalities, and can feed information, move objects through space. Like that stuff to me has always worked super well about the sequel trilogy. That they've added some new fantastical ideas to the Force and prophecies and all that. Now I just want to see more of it instead of like leaning too close, I'd say, like the Acolyte did with the huge open question about the virgins and the twins and how they were conceived instead of, like, doing something totally different, kinda like how the Dyad was.
Critical Thinker says, I recently read Legacy of the Forced Sacrifice. I liked the politics, but I felt the characterization of Mara and Jason was lacking. And the fact that she doesn't tell anyone what she's learned about Jason is dumb. Inferno and Fury were good, but Cadis' depiction was incredibly frustrating and inconsistent, going from tragic fallen hero in Inferno to insane lunatic in Fury. Haven't read Revelation or Invincible yet. So I feel like Legacy of the Force has a lot of great ideas, but the execution is very inconsistent. When it's good, it's great, and when it's bad, it's really bad. I still like it a lot, but it has some problems. You're hitting the nail on the head for basically everyone's criticism of Legacy of the Force.
Yeah.
There are some great books within the series, but it is inconsistent and it's built on the bones of trying to further a conflict that had a fairly decent ending in New Jedi Order and then perpetuating it into the future, trying to create logical next steps for these people while also giving a villain that the most of the series doesn't lead up to. I think Cadus at times feels earned, and then at other times feels wild, like you said. So I agree with your point. Hopefully, you enjoy at least the end of the series, and it returns to form a little for you.
Yeah, the only thing I can really add to that is kind of the Mara angle. I mean, at that point, I don't think Zahn really had much say about how Mara's characterized, especially by the time he, cuts her off, kills her. Right? So, yeah, not a fan of it either. And I think some of it also comes down to the fact that this is a series that, even if it has like the Corellians kind of beginning the Second Galactic Civil War, it has like a fairly interesting premise of like the internal Second Galactic Civil War and how it happens. There's not enough books. If New Jedi Order in some ways is too long, Legacy of the Force has always felt too short. Like it
Hmm.
needed at least two more books to like spread out some of the more bigger, heftier ideas that it had. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a unfortunate place for the series to sit right after New Jedi Order. I know you can consider Darkness, but even Darkness doesn't really like set up much for Legacy of the Force or whatever it does. Legacy of the Force is like, yeah, whatever. That's a side adventure.
Right. New Jedi Order is for an initiative that starts out with a pretty big bang. It gets kind of boring and then rebounds in the middle, which is one of those rare initiatives to have a really great middle act. Usually, the middle act is one of the more boring parts of a long initiative. Whereas, but the boring stuff, the stuff that kind of feels like it takes a while to get into the actual initiative, does pay off by the end because now
Yeah.
you're invested in the world. You know all the politics. You know the different factions. You know which planets are frustrated by the New Republic, which ones are siding with the Yuuzhan Vong. I agree. The Legacy of the Force, if it had more of those boring things, it could technically be better by the middle and end. But it starts with a bang and it goes through it. So, yeah. And then Critical Thinkers saying, what are your thoughts on the big spoiler for the book and the handling of it overall? And then Cadus flips a lot between Dooku-esque villain who think he's right and then a crazy psycho, depending on how the writer feels that day. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things too. And it's interesting initiative to comparing it to New Jedi Order or High Republic or something because it is closer to High Republic in the sense that it was written by the same people. There's only three writers, I think, with Legacy of the Force, right? There's Troy Denning, Karen Travis, and who's the one I'm forgetting?
Troy,
Um,
no, Alst
Gosh,
Alston?
yeah, it is
No.
Aaron Alston.
Yeah.
It's those three, and then but New Jedi Order reused authors only a couple times. Like James Luceno wrote multiple things. Is he the only one? I think he's the only one who wrote multiple things. I don't
Yeah.
know. Greg Keyes wrote a couple, or besides the like duologies that they did. I'm talking about different series within New Jedi Order. So
Mhm.
Legacy of the Force is a little closer to High Republic, but yet it feels more scattered. It doesn't feel like it's something that's had a writer's room of everybody sitting down and going, okay, this is where we're going to go. And the worst for the High Republic, it feels fairly similar in the sense that like different authors tackle different characters or different plot points in different ways. And it might feel inconsistent from the last thing you read. But when that author reclaims their character, they have like the true version of it. When you have Legacy of the Force being so hyper focused on the same set of characters, same plot points, and the continuation, perpetuation of this singular plot, that's when it starts to feel chaotic and inconsistent.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't really add more than that. It's a weird series that it started feeling like that was kinda the end of, like, the whole post Return of the Jedi EU, in a lot of ways. There was so much of the early that you can get away with because it's pulpy, it's fun. New Jedi Order obviously changes the game. Wasn't super like it sold well, but I don't think it had the same appreciation as it does now. And then when Legacy came around, everyone was like, "This is just like you're trying to do some prequel stuff at the same time for almost like same vibes and feelings." You're making some weird changes to a lot of characters that have very established characterization and arcs in their story, and then you're kind of rushing through a lot of these things that could have, been a more tragic fall. Instead, it just feels like you're skipping things or, jumping back and forth. And then some of it, yeah, like you said, Liam, some of it kind of comes down to like they have to do it, right, with those 3 authors versus other authors can kinda, like, do their own little thing, and you might not necessarily progress the story linearly forward, but you kinda get people, like, invested in some other things or, like, some little details about other characters that aren't big stars in this series can be a little bit bigger there. Legacy of the Force doesn't really have that. It's a much narrower scope, and then that, it makes changes to not just Jason and Mara, but characters like Verger and, like, Lumia, and even Luke, honestly, is pretty different for a lot of it too, so a lot of gambles that didn't pay off. It felt like that was, like, kind of the beginning of the end for the books there. Games kinda followed pretty shortly after, like, I think people as much as, like, we've started off with this live talking about, like, "Oh, don't really like where The Force Awakens takes the politics and, the state of, like, Star Wars filmmaking from the sequels, like, what it's shaped into things now." I'm still a lot happier about, like, the potential of where canon can go because I started getting really disappointed by the end there, and once we get to Fate of the Jedi, it gets, like, Clone Wars plot lines that become extremely and, like, one of the weirdest arcs of the Clone Wars becomes so essential for that story. Yeah, it just felt like the EU stopped kinda being its own thing, and it was kinda mandated to, like, mimic and parallel a lot of stuff when it was really it's going in its own direction until the end of the New Jedi Order.
Mhm. Yeah, those are all good points too. Back to the top, we've got Kylie Stewart who says, "Do you think there will be any more shows after Ahsoka season 2, Andor season 2, and Skeleton Crew season 2?" Yes.
Yeah.
We don't have
Short answer
announcements,
is yes.
but absolutely there will be more. Whether it's Ahsoka season 3, there will not be an Andor season 3. Could I see a spinoff or something coming out of Andor, especially connecting to New Republic? Sure. They could do something if they wanted to, if they wanted to keep a similar tone and establish like some of the politics of the early New Republic. I think that would be really interesting. I would be shocked if they don't try to get something like that going, but it
Mhm.
won't be the same team. It won't be Tony Gilroy. He's done. So, uh, so yeah, I think they will have more. Skeleton Crew season 2 is not a fact. We don't know that that's happening yet. So don't get your hopes up that that is confirmed. I think it's a fairly good possibility compared to Acolyte. The Skeleton Crew viewership was going slightly up, even if it wasn't great overall. But I think positive word of mouth on the show bodes better than something like Acolyte, where the word of mouth was mixed to be kind, but mostly negative. So I think it's a possibility, but as of now, we have no idea what the next shows are. We know they're working on an animated show that they have not announced, and we don't know what they're doing with live action. So hopefully we get some announcements here this year, but I said in a past stream that it kind of would excite me a little bit if we got 0 announcements this year for live action TV at Star Wars Celebration, and they took their time to just say, "Here, we've got this for you guys." Kinda like they did with Skeleton Crew when we were at Celebration in 2022, where they were like, "This is happening. We've got our team. We're, like, ready to start pretty soon on production." And it's a surprise. I don't want them to be like, "Here's our slate for the next 10 years," and it's a bunch of stuff that probably is never gonna come out. So, um, I'm hoping that if we get some announcement, it's like 1 thing or 2 things, but maybe it might be more. But, yeah, short answer, there will be more shows, absolutely, after Ahsoka season 2.
Yeah. I don't think Star Wars is ending anytime soon. This is not this case of a late EU where, like, games started kinda coming in and then kind of fell off, and books were going strong and then kind of fell off. Like, we're talking about, like, having too many shows, too much animation, too much on Disney Plus. That's kinda the struggle here. We're talking about, like, let's get bigger initiatives, bigger focuses, like how we started off this whole Disney era with. So, yeah, I know we're gonna get plenty of shows. It's gonna be more like, what is the focus of the show? Are we gonna build out pocket universes like Mandoverse that then get spin-off films out of that because they've kind of outgrow it, or are they gonna be a little bit more concentrated on like augmenting like the bigger events that happen in movies and stuff, right? Like The Mandalorian Grogu is a season 4 that's just been repurposed. It's definitely a Favreau uh, creation that feels a little bit more in line with what he's used to. Right? People forget Mandalorian season 1 and 2 with the help of Filoni. Those were his first 2 seasons of TV ever. He's always been with movies. So they kind of got separated and Ahsoka started taking a little bit of focus away, right? How did that affect the book of Boba Fett and everything? Yeah, I mean, it's not really this. It really did change the scale, the sense of the universe, like just how much expanded, how much of that is Chapix kind of pushing for all these things. Like we don't know. Like we really don't know. But I think TV shows will be even in like live action will be closer to a skeleton crew, but maybe with smaller, tighter budgets to kind of justify like, hey, we want to make this feel like a nice cable TV show or like a network show where you've got 4 seasons of these characters at least where you grow with them. And even if they're not changing the galaxy themselves,
Mhm.
like they're building out something that becomes like, hey, like that character shows up in a film. Oh my god, they have like
Right.
a plethora of story that you can dive into, and they can still have some fun new developments to their characters that both new and old fans can appreciate in that bigger medium, that bigger story.
Absolutely. That's something they need to hyper focus on, is just how do we create our next Mandalorian, basically? How do we create the next TV centric Star Wars property that can really be big for us, that can rival the fandom around the films, right? Especially if Mandalorian's going TV or movie. If Mandalorian is a huge hit, no matter what they say, we're never getting a proper Mandalorian continuation on TV. We
No,
just
no.
aren't. We're gonna he's gonna be a movie star. And that is way more profitable for them. And that's what's going to happen. So I don't want TV to be a staging ground for how do we elevate people to movies? I think it would be nice to get people who are distinctly TV characters and shows and vibe, and then distinctly movie star or movie powering film characters and all that type of stuff. We I think they need to figure out that division, and they need to figure out what's next. They've done so many miniseries, like you were mentioning. I mean, we got so many miniseries. We got the Obi-Wan miniseries. Andor is a is not a miniseries, but it was announced as a 2-season show, so it had a definitive end. We had the Lando show that was now changed into a movie. Rangers of the New
Sure.
Republic was canceled. Ahsoka was 1 season, but they hadn't guaranteed a second. I think what they need to do is announce some shows with at least a direction for a season 2 when they come up with it, not leaving things all on the table like an Acolyte did for a season 2 and then not being able to answer them, but at least have a season 2 in mind. I think we need to get away from miniseries are great. They can do some miniseries, but get away from the kind of Marvel model
Yeah.
of only making miniseries. I think they need to establish a true presence on TV, and they haven't been able to do that. The only thing that's had a season 3 is Mandalorian, and now it's going movie. So I think that's a big thing for them moving forward is how do they establish their next TV shows? And nothing's a hit or a guaranteed hit. Uh, Obviously, Mandalorian, they weren't sure it was going to have a season 2, but immediately they got into production, right? We got a season 2. We forget that we get a season 2 of Mandalorian within a year of
Yeah.
season 1, which
Yeah.
is unheard of in today's world for TV. And, they need to get back to that. They need to get back to trying to get a season of TV out within a year to a year and a half of the previous season. They need to get back to developing projects that are made for TV that have 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons in mind, and they need to get that focus going again because if everything's made with like a, "Oh, we might not make this again later," it's hard to get a true commitment out of the talent. It's hard to get a true commitment out of the writers because they don't know if they're gonna have a job post this project. So I think trying to establish something with a framework is important, just like it is for film. So hopefully we get that moving forward. And then Kylie Stewart also says, "Is the Levy Star Wars movie confirmed?" I watched Sean Levy's movie last night, The Adam Project on Netflix. It is confirmed, and seemingly it is one of the next ones to shoot. It seems to be a fight between Dawn of the Jedi and Sean Levy's Star Wars movie as the next movie they're going to make. I think, or from what we've heard, I mean, we talked about 2 weeks ago the rumor about Ryan Gosling now being attached to be the main character of whatever this movie is. And we also know that they have hired a writer. I believe they hired the writer from the Adam Project. So we know that this movie's like actually moving. It's one of the things that seems the furthest in development out of anything that they made, which is, and again, going not to get on another rant, but like it goes back to the age old thing about Lucasfilm, which is interesting that they're a studio that often is listening to a lot of pitches from high profile talent, right? But how do those pitches not get off the ground if they're pitches? It's not like they're searching somebody and going, "Hey, we want you to make a movie about this. You come up with it now if you want to do it." They're having people coming in with their ideas, right? So those movies should be faster because those ideas are there, like a Skeleton Crew, right? That was pitched to John Favreau. So it'll be interesting, and hopefully, since seemingly Sean Levy's movie was pitched to them by Sean Levy, hopefully it's actually further in development because he actively had an idea when they hired him.
Yeah, and the fact that it could be tied to Gosling, right? That also adds a little bit of a faster element, I think, to getting into production because we don't typically, even like when I've given the criticisms of The Force Awakens out, it still had arguably the longest time for all the films because they filmed it in 2013 and took like a year, and then they spent so much time searching for the talent and all that. So it was all young talent, unknown talent for the most part. For me, it was very strange because I saw all of these actors and movies and like shows other than Daisy Ridley right before, so I was very excited by all the casting. Um, but yeah, like they spent a lot of time on it. When you have someone established like Gosling, I think it's a little bit more close to something like a Rosario Dawson, where you're like, "Okay, how do we bring her here without feeling like, oh, she's Rosario Dawson, oh, she's Gosling?" And Gosling has been very good at character acting. He maybe plays an archetype really well, right? So maybe that's what they're gonna lean on to, like, get the film off the ground. But we don't know if they're gonna go with, like, the serious, like, the K from Blade Runner, right? Or, The Place Beyond the Pines or something, or if they were gonna go with, "Hey, let's go with The Nice Guys, let's go with Barbie." Let's go with that kind of comedic, but with like a heart of gold sort of character that he's become very adept at, right? Or are we merging the two? Or like, what is the tone? When is the setting? All this and that. But once you add someone of caliber, it really does force like studios and writers to everyone just be like, oh man, like you've got the talent that could be huge with this franchise. It's different than what we're used to, but as we've seen with other franchises, sometimes the right person has to be attached to get the script moving, and maybe that's what's happening here.
Mhm.
Maybe Levi's getting off the ground. Maybe Gosling has kind of done what a lot of modern actors are doing, where he's kind of gotten his own writers team, his own studio backing him too to get the script pushing the right talent behind the screen, right? That we don't know about yet. Maybe all these things are happening, and that's why there's a lot more confidence, it seems, and that's why the trades have been talking about him too. So yeah, I hope that it's different than other Levi, like, films. I've been more impressed by what he did with Stranger Things. I was happy with what Free Guy did, but it's a very silly Gosling-esque film. I wanna see not Gosling, Reynolds-esque film. I wanna see what he does with Gosling, who's admittedly, I think, just a much more interesting talent. I think Gosling has mastered what he's done, and comedy is hard to do, but he's kinda mastered being Ryan Reynolds. Gosling has never put himself in a position where he's like, "Oh, I am Gosling, and this is who I'm gonna be." He's every 4 or 5 years, he kinda disappears from the industry, comes back, and you're like, "Wow, I didn't know you had that layer to you," or, like, maybe you've experienced something in life that's allowed you to explore that part of yourself. And I think now that, we've had him for Barbie and all that, by the time he comes around for this Star Wars film, if it happens, we'll get another layer of who he is kinda peeled away from the core.
I think that's a really good point, is when you have high profile talent like that, you absolutely do need to get these things off the ground, especially if you wanna work with them again. These
Yeah.
people have packed schedules, so you can't drag them along and say, "Well, maybe we'll do this eventually." They need commitment, and so, that's a good point. Hopefully, it does happen soon. I mean, I think one of the weirdest mysteries right now going on in Star Wars is for sure Dawn of the Jedi, because
Yeah.
when you hear like Lucasfilm, you hear a lot of rumors coming out of Lucasfilm that it might shoot this year, but then you hear James Mangold talk about it like 2 weeks ago when he's doing press for the
Completely
Bob Dylan
wrong.
movie. Um, he's like, "Yeah, I'm, with my movie, with my idea, I don't want it to be like handcuffed by the rest of the Star Wars lore." Everything he says make it sound like it hasn't even been written yet. We know the writer was working on it because he said it might come out this year. So I don't know. It's just a strange project. I would bet on the Sean Levy movie coming out before, or at least being shot before. But it'll be interesting to see which one actually goes into production first. And wow, it'll be exciting to know that a second Star Wars movie, or a first Star Wars movie that didn't have Jon Favreau's name on it, is in production since 2018 with
Yeah.
The Rise of Skywalker. Next up, we have Anthony. And Anthony, like I mentioned before, and we're going to try to get to at least two questions from everybody, and then we'll come back to you here right after. So we'll go to Skywalker's Academy, who asks a pretty simple question, but definitely one that's probably going to have a long answer. Um, and it's a loaded question for sure. Does Star Wars need saving? Why or why not? That's tough. That's tough. And I don't think, we're the optimistic Star Wars channel most of the time. Realistic, but optimistic. But Star Wars, or this question, the answer to it, as with almost everything, is yes and no. Does it need saving? I think yes, more than it's ever needed. And it's not necessarily about the quality or the different things you'll hear a lot of people mention politically, all those types of things that a lot of people will attribute to why Star Wars hasn't been doing well lately. But it really is specifically about the younger generation, right? Star Wars has kind of had its complete grasp on almost every generation of fans since the 70s. It's been able to come out consistently enough to reach out and grab the next generation and re-inspire them and recaptivate them in a new way. And even if the previous generation doesn't love what's coming out, usually the new things kind of really vibe with the sensibilities of the younger audience. We can speak from experience on that, because I didn't know that people hated the prequels until I got older. Like when I was a kid, I thought everybody loved them as much as I did because they were awesome and they were Star Wars to me. And I have a feeling we're going to see people in the future have the same thing about the sequels and then Mandalorian. But now we're getting to a time where we've really been at a 3-4 year stretch where you've got to wonder what connects with the younger audiences about what Star Wars has been making. I think that's a big thing for them, is figuring out how do we resurrect Star Wars in the minds of kids and the next generation of fans, on top of pleasing, the 3, 4, 5 generations of fans that we already have, right? I think Star Wars is eternal for a lot of people who loved it already. People will leave, like we know, critical thinker here, one of our loyal fans who shows up all these streams, has often said that he's not interested really in too many of the things they make on Disney Plus or in film until they can prove that they are on the right track again, can make quality product. And I think that's where a lot of people are at. There are a lot of people, ourselves included. I'll throw myself in there. I will watch everything, but I don't have a confidence in Star Wars anymore. I've lost a lot of faith in that something's going to be good. I think, and also worse, I've lost a lot of faith that something's actually going to come out when they announce it. I think there's a lack of excitement, a lack of enthusiasm, and a lack of joy around this franchise right now. Not just with the divide between the fandom, but the fact that we can't trust the company because we can't trust that things are actually going to come out. So it's hard to get too excited about Rey's movie when you don't know if it's ever going to exist. It's hard to get too excited about uh, Dawn of the Jedi when you don't know if it's ever going to exist. And it's just been a track record of things not ever coming to fruition that has led to this overall general hesitation. I think for sure that's the correct word. It's people are hesitant to get too emotionally attached to things because you don't know what's coming and what's going to go and what's going to stay and what's going to happen. So that's a big thing. They need to get more consistent with that. And I think they need saving there, but they need to create product that vibes with with children and is able to get that next generation perpetuating the Star Wars myth. Because right now there's more competition than there's ever been. You've got Marvel, which has captivated audiences in theaters for the last almost 20 years. And Marvel has certainly taken that spot up. But with entertainment at your fingertips in every single way now, kids and people, impressionable youth, have things to latch onto besides Star Wars. Back in the day, Star Wars was the event. Now it's just another one of these movies to come out. You have to recreate the event that is Star Wars. You have to recreate the passion within the fan base that already exists, the excitement and desire about what's coming out for the fan base that already exists, and you have to reappeal to the younger audience as well. It's a massive thing that they need to do with Star Wars, but I do think that there's no world in which Star Wars doesn't need at least a little bit of saving, especially if you look at this year, right? I mean, who would have thought that 2 Star Wars shows coming out this year would barely crack some of the top-rated shows of the year? Like, it's just unfathomable, right? Even if it is with new characters. You have lightsabers, you have the Force, you have the Empire, you have the the Rebels, you have X-Wings. That stuff used to be a guaranteed hit, and it's not anymore, and that's why it needs saving, not necessarily for all the other reasons people say, the more loaded reasons. I think as a brand, it is just starting to fade off its excitement level, and they need to reinvigorate that excitement.
Yeah, I have a lot of the similar sentiments. I do think Star Wars needs to be saved, but I think it's more saved from a lot of the decisions of its first 10 years under Disney, right? Like it feels like yes, you can find a lot of art that's been coming out from the Rise of Skywalker recently that does date stuff even before The Force Awakens about Palpatine showing up and all this and that. But on the movie side, how does it turn out? 3 solid to great films, maybe you don't love 1 or 2 of them, sure, but they all did $1 billion. They all kind of got what Disney really wanted out of them, and yeah, by other studio standards, great hits. By this franchise and Disney standards, maybe not so much, right? So, what are we gonna do with movies? Well, we still don't have an answer, right? Our next movie up after some of the early failures of the Star Wars story, right? Rogue One, incredible hit. Solo, reshot, and no marketing, and people love Alden and everyone now, but like it was still pretty mixed then because they're like, oh, he doesn't look like Harrison, he doesn't act like Harrison, and then they see deep fakes of that and they're like, oh, he was perfect, why didn't we go do Solo 2, right? So making sure that there is a direction and not like constantly remaking your mind about the direction of movies, that has to happen. And these announcements should, I think it's inevitable that Star Wars, which is how divisive it can be online in fandoms, that even the trays are gonna try to get a little bit of the attention of people like, "Oh, here's a rumor that seems fairly credible from our sources that, hey, Gosling's showing up for the Levi film," or something like that. That stuff will never go away. I think the fact is now we live in a medium where, like, there's leakers, there's people in the know that they can kinda run their own, websites and social media and become so effective at communicating, like, different things that may or may not be happening in behind the scenes of Star Wars. Other franchises have that, but Star Wars is a little too potent sometimes. So you're not gonna get away past that other than making sure there's a clear direction and that things are happening, and then when they're announced, it actually does happen within 2 years, right? These official announcements have to stop coming out, and, some of them were forced. We know that the 2020 slate was essentially forced by Chapek. Kathleen did not wanna say half of that stuff there. Like, really? A droid story? Seems really cool and fun, but I don't think that was ever something past, like, storyboards at that point, right? Like, just a fun, maybe side project that started off with some intern's idea that, like, some people were like, "Oh, yeah, this could be pretty fun. Let's dig into that." Right? Stuff like that, there wasn't really much of a basis for that being official announcements. We gotta stop that, and it seems like they've stopped that with Star Wars, with Marvel. They're getting a little bit very, very clear when they are announcing it, they're making it big and grand again. We're moving past a lot of the mistakes of the Chapek era that made a lot of the Iger mistakes with the movies a little bit more apparent. It kind of ties back to our next point that we've kind of talked about here with the Star Wars, movies, kinda transitioning into this Disney Plus era, it started off so well. I don't think anybody thought that Mandalorian and Grogu would be this huge or The Mandalorian would be this such a huge hit, and then season 2 would be, like, even bigger, and I think even if you didn't like how season 2 went with it connecting to Luke and Ahsoka and all that, for the most part, seems like everybody was very damn excited for, like, the next season. Damn excited for the Mandoverse. Boba Fett getting his own show, come on, how could you not be excited with that little teaser, right? But they stretched themselves too thin. Filoni and Favreau got split up, and then it became like, "Hey, is this just a bunch of cool shows set around this time, like a Bantam era universe, or are they all leading into one big conflict?" And they felt like they had to go with the latter because of just how big the characters were there. So, like we were talking about before, keep the movies big events, keep the shows a little bit more like pockets of the universe that if they do have any reference in other things, great. If they have a character cameo, great. But it really, really shouldn't be like, hey, we have to transition our TV shows that or in streaming, which streaming is not necessarily super profitable. Let's now make it a movie universe for everything. Like that can't happen. Right? Like we'll let it slide with the Mandalorian Grogu because we never knew this could be such a huge story for all of Star Wars. But yeah, I don't think that should be direction moving forward. So if it has to mean that live action shows are smaller budget, feel more like old school TV shows, closer to animation and their importance to Star Wars, that's probably for the best. So those two things need to happen. And 3, I don't think this is something Liam and I have talked about, but one thing that's always disappointed me is that I feel like Star Wars was a little late to the game for a lot of things, right? Especially outside of, you know, just the technological advancements of ILM. Like a lot of the big things that ILM used to be known for was the Star Wars films. Like we've changed to digital filmmaking, how we're using green screen now instead of blue screen, animatronics and how they're being brought back in. All that stuff to kick off The Force Awakens, really cool. But they're beautiful films, but I wouldn't say they're, like, anything technologically superior to, like, what we got out of Endgame or Infinity War, like, some of those ambitious scale that happens there. We need that to start happening again in Star Wars. We need to feel like, "Oh, they're pushing the boundaries." And then other mediums, right? Like, yes, it's great that we got the High Republic and it's picking up of, like, the best parts of New Jedi Order structure-wise and all that. There's still flaws with it, but it's something that we're missing for so long. It took what, 6, 7 years for something like that to get kicked into gear? It was really weird. It was really, really weird. And now that we're getting some stuff like the manga from the High Republic, that still feels like a side piece. Path of the Lightsaber. Manga has become such a huge thing. Anime has become such a huge thing since we were both in like late middle school, or early high school when it started being weird and geeky to like this is the pop culture now. How did it take so long to get original manga? We only had like small little things here and there. We still don't have an anime, like, hopefully that gets announced this year, but it feels like, yes, things are biting into more and more people's attention, but the thing that's helping counter that is new mediums, new ways of telling story. That's why things like storytelling in video games becoming a lot more narrative focused. Star Wars has always kinda kept up with that. That's why when the Jedi Fallen Order game came out and Survivor came out, people love that. Even if you don't love Outlaws, people are excited for that and Squadrons to have more story. That's what Star Wars was really ahead of its time for, to, like, continue building out its franchise with video games having, fairly decent stories. That's why Star Wars hasn't really fluctuated there, but it's fluctuated in other mediums that it should have really picked into a little bit more. Can you imagine, like, original Star Wars webtoons where people read on their phones? Maybe you don't like that concept, but that's a huge market. They just need to start kicking into that more.
Those are all good points as well. Because Lucas, for all his flaws that people want to attribute to him, he was an absolute master marketer. And he had his finger in every pie. He had Star Wars everywhere, right? I mean, one of the most brilliant strokes he ever did was he sold an empty box in 1977 that you will get your Star Wars toys at some point. But for Christmas, he needed to get something out, right? And then the toys didn't come out till 78. This guy was on top of it always. He was ahead of
Yeah.
everything on in marketing. He was ahead of everything technologically. And Star Wars is being part of a machine now. It doesn't look to push the boundaries as much. And we've talked about that. We haven't necessarily talked about that in terms of innovation, so I think that's a good point, but we definitely have talked about that in terms of storytelling, and Star Wars needs to figure out how to push the envelope, find new paths. Don't always rely on the old things, even if it is an old nostalgia-based franchise, but find the next thing. That's the biggest part, as I mentioned it earlier, find the next Mandalorian. They need to absolutely desperately do that, but they also need to find the next Mandalorian in TV, right? And now in film. Mandalorian is now going to be in the movie universe, but they need to go beyond that. Mandalorian's still too tied to the main Star Wars continuity. And they need to take risks, but they need to do them correctly. They need to put the time and effort. And it's a big thing. I mean, it's easy for all of us to sit here and say, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I think they're relatively aware of all of it, but they also have a business to run and have to get content out. It's the only way they can they can survive. So it's a combination of everything, and they need to figure out what it is. But I think they have waited long enough to where you would expect, hopefully, some form of plan and initiative and action for the
Mm,
franchise here. But it's a multifaceted problem. We've had some great books, we've had some great comics, we've had some great video games, but it certainly isn't. Star Wars isn't the brand it was under Lucas, because Lucas had his finger in every single pie constantly.
yeah.
And now Star Wars is kind of taking a step back. When something fails, we take a step back and we try to do it in a different way. But then if that fails, then they take a step back and try to do it in a different way. George was just nonstop with the extra content.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
had less films, we had less TV, but we had way more in terms of books, comics, video games, and that's crazy because it was all funded by one person versus
Yeah.
a corporation that owns a comic book company, that owns a streaming service, that owns all this stuff, right? So it's going to be interesting to see where they take it. I think people have always talked about Star Wars burnout. Can you have Star Wars burnout? Is there superhero fatigue? Can there be Star Wars fatigue? Absolutely. But nothing fatigues fans faster than when you make mediocre stuff. And so I think the number one thing they have to focus on is obviously quality. And it seems to be what they're hell bent on doing. It seems to be why they've been slow to get things out, why they've been relatively hesitant and unsure to release things. And I think they're trying to get a grasp on the fandom. Hopefully, they listen to a lot of people. Hopefully, they try to use the ideas that people have thrown around as at least bases for where to start. You never want to listen to the fans completely, in the sense that you don't want to base your entire movie on what a fan says you should do,
Yeah.
but you need to listen to the general interest levels of fans on certain directions, right? I think that's what I always call for. And you need to listen to criticism. Those are the two most important uses of the fan base besides consumption, is that the fan base will tell you what they like and don't like, and they'll tell you what they're interested in and not interested in. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't take risks and try something that they've never heard of before, because that might be their next big thing. But you've got to at least listen to the criticism about what you're currently doing. And hopefully that's what they're doing. I mean, we've talked about a lot how even this year, the Acolyte Skeleton Crew, these are the remnants of their previous regime at Disney. And even though that regime ended 2, 3 years ago, with the strikes, with COVID, these things have trickled out a lot slower than usual. So hopefully in 2026, you're going to really start to see the Bob Iger version of Star Wars, or his second version of Star Wars, and we'll see how that plays on everything. But yeah, thanks for that question. That might actually end up being clipped into a video or something, because it's a very
Yeah.
loaded, good question, and we appreciate that. But yeah, I think Star Wars needs saving in some form. It just might not need a complete ground up blow up like everybody says and then restart. There's ways to do it without being dramatic. And I think and hope that they can figure out what those are. Brandon Tran says, first question, which 2025 Marvel project looks the most interesting so far between trailers, or based on the trailers, between Daredevil Born Again and Fantastic Four First Steps? I'd
Ooh.
have to go with Fantastic Four personally, just because I'm a big Fantastic Four fan. Now, I've read more Daredevil than Fantastic Four, but I've read a lot of Fantastic Four, and I really love those characters. I love the unit. I love how different they are from what we've seen before. Daredevil, very excited for, but it's also a fourth season basically of a show. that I already really liked. Fantastic Four has never gotten any good live action media. So I'm really hopeful about this one and very excited to see hopefully some respect given back to these characters, similarly to how excited I am for a lot of DC stuff. I just want respect back on these characters' names. I want people to fall in love with these characters like I did when I first read the comics, and that to me is the most exciting thing. But Daredevil also has a great trailer, and it is definitely the second most anticipated project for me from Marvel this year.
It's a tough one. I think if you look at it as just like hype for me, it's Daredevil because I think I'm currently making my way through the Netflix shows, right? I held off on them throughout college and everything because I don't know. I just thought like, yeah, it's not really canon. I never got into Agents of Shield either and stuff. So I was like, yeah, I know Agent Carter had Feige like executive producer, so I was like, maybe I'll get into that. I think I'll watch like an episode or two, but I until streaming began with Disney, I never really took anything MCU adjacent seriously, right? It was always just like, hey, I wanna check out the movies. I missed out on a couple of things before Infinity War. Time to catch up. The hype is building, all that, right? So that was always my mentality. But now that, like, they've stopped trying to, like, pseudo, like, build it up as, like, "Oh, it's kind of in the universe, but not the way you exactly remember it," and just straight up saying, like, "No, it's canon," right? We're gonna go with mature tone and everything here with, Star Wars. This is how we want it to be, and, sorry, not Star Wars, with, Marvel, this is how we want it to be again. This is where some of these street style grounded stories can really thrive in these mediums just like they originally did, maybe now with a little bit extra money, with a little extra darkness, a little bit extra gore, like, yeah, I think that gets me excited. The one thing that gets me not so excited is some of the comments that I've been hearing from the showrunner, or not the showrunner, the writer, director, whatever.
Mhm.
He's like, "Yeah, like, sometimes they would just be talking and navel gazing and all that." It's like, I don't disagree in some ways, but there are some crucial scenes, especially in the Daredevil show, that I'm like, you kinda need to have them stare at each other, looking at each other, and, like, really contemplating what they're doing here without these extreme superpowers that we see in the films, right? So, um, yeah, it was always a weird thing to read. Like, I get being wanting to be confident, right? Maybe streamlining the episode countdown to get rid of some of these, like, walk and talk episodes that were kinda happening with 13 episodes. But yeah, I that one, kinda turned me off. I've only seen the Fantastic Four trailer on my phone. I had a copy of the Comic-Con one that they showed off that got me
Mhm.
super excited back in the day, and it looks like they've kinda copied some scenes, like, from test footage to, like, final. The aesthetic is incredible. The more I see of it, I'm happy, and I know people hated Joseph Quinn being cast for Johnny Storm because I mean, Chris Evans, it's kinda hard to beat him. He probably is probably the most accurate of the Johnny Storm, that we've gotten, and the most, like, accurate of the 4 of in a group, who's the most accurate Fantastic Four, it was probably Chris Evans, Johnny Storm, which is not saying much, but still, and he just had a charisma to him that it's hard to deny. I know Joseph Quinn is a little skinnier, a little more gangly. People remember him as Eddie Munson and a bunch of these other films that he's starting to blowing up into, but he's never really played a role of like that cool, like, jock, essentially. And here you're like, "Oh my god," like, he looks terrible in behind the scenes. See the trailer, everyone's now changing their tone. They're like, "Wow, he looks the best." So, seeing that definitely gets me excited. Seeing the thing with Ivan, and Herbie, that was really hyped. I just really wanted them to do something meta and be like, "Hey, cousin, like this recipe's not tasting so good," get some of that bear into that dialogue. I've seen so many TikTok edits of Herbie as Carmy just screaming like, "Get out of my kitchen, get out of my expo," and all that. So yeah, that looks great. And for a film that's got such a tight post-production schedule, such a tight overall schedule, the fact that seems like they've kind of gone with the James Gunn method of like nailing down the aesthetic, the way you want your shots to be laid out, storyboarded so that you're like actively working on it during production already with post-production. I think it's going to result in the film looking quite good because where they finished filming and where this trailer came out, a lot of it looks really dang good for the powers, and I think the thing maybe needs a little bit more work around his mouth and stuff, but they've nailed it. The
Yep.
perfect balance of CGI and the physical costume, it's working for me, so I think ultimately, that'll be probably the most hype thing for me, even more than Superman by the time we come around to, like, April, May, but Daredevil has my heart right now because I'm watching all the Netflix shows.
And that's fair too. I haven't watched Daredevil since I watched season 3 the, like, day it came out, so
Yeah.
it's been a long time, but, yeah, I think I'm just ready to see this finally. Like, I've read the entire Jack Kirby, Stan Lee run. I've read the John Byrne run. I've read the Jonathan Hickman run. I've read the Mark Waid run. I just wanna see this finally happen, and so hopefully this happens, and it's great. Brandon, second question says, speaking of Marvel for 20th Century Fox's Fantastic Four movies, where would you rank 2005 Fantastic Four, 2007's Fantastic Four: Rise of the
Oh.
Silver Surfer, and 2015's Fant Four Stick? Um, God, that one's last by far. Like,
Yeah.
as mediocre as the other two movies are, that movie sucks. It's so bad. I don't understand how. I mean, I do understand how bad how they made it that bad because Josh Trank and all the problems they were having on set
Oh
and the
boy.
oversight and everything that was going on at Fox at that time. But it's a disaster. But it's one of those movies that, like, when you watch it, knowing the reputation around it, I challenge too many people to watch the the first 45 minutes and not go like, "This isn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be," 'cause it isn't. It's actually, like, it's okay. And then you get to the 1 year later title card, and it's, like, just embarrassing after that. So that one's terrible. That's last. I would put it in order of release, really. I would do, Fantastic Four as the top one. Neither one of Fantastic Four or Rise of the Silver Surfer are good, but for me, one of my biggest frustrations with a movie is even when you have a bad movie, I'd rather see the whole bad movie than chop it down and completely destroy it in the edit. And Rise of the Silver Surfer is super, super messy in the edit. It's just completely crushed by editing. It's chopped down to like an hour and a half. It's so, so messy. Where at least Fantastic Four, it's a cheesy, bad movie, but it at least is a complete cheesy bad movie. So I would put that as the best Fantastic Four movie we've seen, then Rise of the Silver Surfer. Then I would put, if we're really wanting to get into it, the 90s Fantastic Four, which I have watched. You can watch it on YouTube, or used to be able to watch it on YouTube. And then 2015 is by far last. It's horrible.
Yeah, I have all the same thoughts. I think what frustrates me a little bit more is that I think it was pretty late into production, but they decided Galacticus is just gonna be a big cloud. It's like, what?
Mhm.
Like, it's supposed to be weird and strange. That's the whole shtick about Fantastic Four. And one thing I never really understood about 5, especially, is like, yes, they show the origin. It's not that bad, honestly. I think it's everything that they do around like the initial power sets and everything being discovered. I do find it fun in a pretty campy way. It's just that I don't really like how Doom is used. I don't really like the design for Doom. Eh, I think once they actually team up, it gets worse. It's when they're kinda all split off that it's a little bit better. Jessica Alba just doesn't really no disrespect to her, but she's not a good fit for Sue Storm. Sue Storm is the one trying to keep the family together instead of like, "Oh, here's a hot blonde, and, oh, her clothes are off every minute, and she keeps on forgetting." Like, that's not Sue at all. Even with my limited knowledge compared to Liam, it's just not it. I think you could say I can't ever Eon, I don't know how you say his name, but the guy who played Mr. Fantastic.
Yeah. I think it's
Yeah,
he pronounces it Ian, I
Ian,
think.
right? Okay. People in Europe with strange spellings, I guess. But, yeah, I don't know, like, I looked at him and I'm like, I think he gets a lot of it right, and I could definitely see him play like a very, a Mr. Fantastic if he got to continue to roll, like, very arrogant and, like, Council Reed-esque and, you know, having more control than actually trying to be a pure scientist. Like, I think that all was there, honestly, in that. But he's saddled with, like, nothing to do that feels worthwhile for me. And then the second film, I'm like, "This feels dumber." Um, Ben Grimm, the actor for that. I think he does a good job. It's just the look isn't there. It never really clicked for me. It just it's fine. It's just a dude though, right? Ben Grimm should be a little bit bigger than a normal dude. He should be like fit and all that. It should be different, and it doesn't really feel different for me. Even though I think he's got the best performance, I just don't think the thing
Yeah.
costume works, and I think that's important. And then yeah, Johnny Storm is just Johnny Storm, and he feels like just a jock instead of a jock that actually has some well-meaning intentions, has a relationship with his sister, has some semblance of like trying to be doing things for science and all that. The fact that there's no science in those films kills me. It really does. It just like there's nothing about that that feels like they're nerds that are all trying to stick together in some way. Like, why would I think Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man would ever wanna be around this Fantastic Four? This doesn't make sense. I can see the X-Men of the 2000s and, kinda team up and, like, have Spider-Man running into their mansion or something causing chaos, but I couldn't see this version of Fantastic Four. So, yeah, it goes 5, then 7. 15, I like the tone in the trailers, and then you start realizing they repeated it again and again and again, and then I never watched it. I know people are like, "Oh, I don't like the race swapping and all that." My problem wasn't even that. My problem was like once I heard Josh Trank was going on benders, leaving the set, misses a celebration where he was supposed to be announced as a Book of Boba Fett's predecessor, the Boba Fett films director.
Mhm.
Yeah, after I heard all that, I lost all faith. That was where I lost it. I thought Michael B. Jordan would be a great Johnny Storm, just personality-wise. I think he would have nailed it. But I think there were just too many changes, the strange tone, all of it just felt like, okay, like you're trying to go for like a grim dark Fantastic Four. And then at the end of the day, its legacy today is Miles Teller, who's now much more bigger than he was back then, being like, say that again. That meme of him like when
Fantastic.
Ben Grimm says that was fantastic. It's like, huh, that could be you could be onto something, right? If a film that's supposed to be so serious and dark and all that ends up becoming a meme in today's world with that line, that should just tell you how bad the legacy was. So 5, 7, 15, and you can't even see on the screen.
Yeah, and Brandon says hopefully new Fantastic Four will break the curse of bad movies. I hope so. I mean, if you don't want to count the Roger Corman one from the 90s, it is technically our fourth movie, so maybe it's the fourth time's the charm for Fantastic Four. And then Brandon also says closest good Fantastic Four movie is The Incredibles. Absolutely, it's by far the best Fantastic Four movie. So yeah, thank you for that. We got a super chat from Skywalker's Academy. Thank you for supporting the show tonight. Skywalker's Academy says pretty good answer. Thanks. Chosen one can be number two. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Um, as your second question, or what? Maybe clarify that. I'm confused, but I assume the pretty good answer is in reference to us answering your other question. So thank you for that. And then once you clarify, we'll go back to you. But then we did get through two questions from everybody, I believe, tonight so far. So we're gonna go back up. I'll scroll back up to Anthony, who had his last question. I skipped over to get two from everybody. And I believe that is the one that says, one thing I mentioned before, and this is the last time I will mention it, is that I'm very frustrated by people dub who I dub EU purists. These are not people who prefer the EU over canon. They are those who believe that Legends is without any problems and they offer inconsistent criticisms. This is why I love your guys' channel, because your guys' criticism is consistent. I'm also frustrated by the group because they attack anyone who disagrees with them and call them fake fans. These EU purists have forced me off many Star Wars subreddits as the toxicity is insane. Yeah, well, I mean, I don't blame you, Anthony. There are a lot of people out there who are like that. We try to not be like that at all. So I'm glad you recognize that. It's something that you're just always going to have to deal with, unfortunately. It's just a part of the world today. But you just can't let whatever other people say get you down. You just have to stick with your guns, ignore what other people are saying. If you believe something that's different, even if you're the only one that believes that, it's all good. You are the one that develops your Star Wars opinions. Nobody else should influence you. It doesn't mean you should be blind or ignore other people's criticism. You can
Yeah.
take what somebody says to heart and go, well, maybe I didn't look at it like that. But you shouldn't change your beliefs or your opinions to conform to what other people are saying.
Yeah. It's like echo all the same things there. The internet of today is not the same as even 10 years ago. There's so many more bots online. So much more of the internet is like controlled by people who, have a certain direction of like, I want people to believe this. It's a lot more propaganda and everything, right? When Twitter first came out, that place was crazy because you could do anything on there, right? Like people would say anything, do anything. And it was like that was what early social media was like. That's not the same anymore. And yeah, someone could probably clip what I'm saying and be like, "Oh, you know what? You're saying bots are everywhere, but what about the people who bought it for Acolyte and because they're like, oh, it's such a popular show and love." But I'm not saying there isn't for that either. There's positive and negative bots, but what usually works better online, negativity sells, right? So why wouldn't there be more negative bots? And yeah, and spaces that have people who are more EU purists, right? They will have some negativity. Like we know there's Legends Con and Legend Expo and all that. And I looked into that. I haven't seen what the latest update has been, but even with those people who meet each other, they've had toxicity. They literally split up their different things. People took away the LLC and all that. And this is meant to be a celebration of Legends, right? So I think some of it comes down to like when you're an absolute purist of one thing or the other with Star Wars, instead of like embracing it and like trying out different things, even from different continuities, you start to believe like, "Oh, okay, this is my thing. It's everything's perfect. I have to protect it and all that." And that starts coming out. It's natural to be defensive. And I think EU fans are a little bit more defensive in general because the story's incomplete. They never get their true ending. And I feel for them. I feel for them because I am them. Like I wish there was something like the Sword of the Jedi trilogy to at least get us to that point. Right now, like once we finally cover all the Legends books on our channels, we might have to read like the Hand of Thrawn fan fiction books that people have written to like the guy's name is Hand of Thrawn 45, but like he wrote some books to bridge the gaps, past Crucible and all the way to Legacy and then a little bit past Legacy too to close out the universe. Right? Like it's going to be incomplete. Liam has talked about like we should maybe get some books, and I agree. I would like to at least see sort of the Jedi and some of the ones that were planned from the original authors just to bridge us to at least the Star Wars Legacy comics, right? Maybe even finish the Legacy Volume 2, but it seems so far like that's not gonna happen, so I can understand why people are more defensive, and it only gets amplified when things are deemed bad or deemed things don't line up with, like, their beliefs and all that, and frankly, when things are just average, right? Because they're like, "Oh, of course, this book of mine that is perfect, it is one of the better received Star Wars books, is better than Book of Boba Fett." Of course, I'm not gonna disagree with you, but it all builds up, builds up, builds up. Maybe they hear some voices that are real. Maybe they hear some voices that are bots. But that negativity is built up, and you're coming into a fandom at the end of the day, Anthony, that's been toxic since 1980, right? Actually, even earlier, they've been toxic since 78, rightfully so with the holiday special, I'd say. But yeah, they were toxic about Empire Strikes Back. There were writings to you can find of old newspaper clippings saying like this was bad, like I hated this film. Reviews from local papers were not really kind to it because everyone wanted Star Wars 2, not The Empire Strikes Back. Yes, it did well with the critics, but not the same way. And if they had today's social media, maybe we don't look at Empire the same way. Maybe we criticize all of its filmmaking. Oh, this doesn't look this great or whatever, right? And maybe it doesn't have the same reputation now that it does now. The internet came, it changed Star Wars. Media came, it changed Star Wars. Social media came, it changed Star Wars, right? It's just piled up, piled up, piled up. And then once Disney came, no matter what, how positive or negative you are, it will cause a split in what was already Star Wars and now what is Star Wars. And the things that are being shared in between, that doesn't help purists. So I can get a lot of the angles that they're coming from. But yeah, this is a space that you don't have to worry about that. You're gonna see. I mean, Liam just dropped a review for Dark Lord of the Sith. That's an EU book, right? Especially a later EU book. So we love both continuities. We love discussing, comparing, contrasting, and also dealing with the realities of like, hey, one is a lot more visual, medium based. The other is a lot more textual based, especially as time went on. And it's hard to compare those mediums fairly when unless you like look at them at the peak of both of them at the visual peaks. That's really the only way you could.
Brandon says his third question is, if you were casting the director of Avengers Secret Wars and had the chance to bring back an old character in 2000s Marvel movies, which actor would you want to return to the MCU? It's an interesting question. It's a good question. Um, trying to think of one that's a little more outside the box because I think there are the safe, obvious answers that I think all of us would go for, right? Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, Professor Charles Xavier, Ian, what's blanking on his name, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen's Magneto. I would love to see any of those people back for one last hurrah. But I'm trying to think of somebody a little different. I mean, I think one that would be super fun, even if it would be something that we've heard before that was shut down by the actor, would be Nick Cage's Ghost Rider. I would love to see that. I would love to see it. It's not the first Ghost Rider is not the worst thing ever. It's not good, but it's not horrible. It's kinda like that Fantastic Four 1 realm where it's like a 2 out of 5, not the worst movie in the world. But the second one is awful. So yeah, I don't know. I think that would be one of my big ones. I mean, Blade, I wanna see Blade, I wanna see Elektra, I wanna see those characters back. Um, but I'm trying to think here, what other Fox movies or other franchise movies were out there that I would like to see back. I don't know if you have anything off the top of your head, Cynic, but I mean, Tobey Maguire would be my number one. I love his Spider-Man. That was a foundational movie for me. It was one of those things that just was everywhere when it came out, and it's one of those things that I really, really love a lot. Both of those first two movies, and even three has like similar place in my heart as like some of the Star Wars prequels. Because there's a lot of goofy things in it that you really love, both ironically and unironically, because you lived through that and you enjoyed that time, right? So Toby would be my top for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Hugh Jackman's back. That would have been my number one. Um, I think we'll honestly get another Patrick Stewart appearance at some point. I know he's killed off in the multiverse madness one, but that's a variant really. So you can always go for
Yeah,
another one that's straight X-Men. And from all the different Fox timelines that there are, there's plenty you could go from. Um, I I do like the older Magneto that McKellen plays. I just happen to like Fassbender's a little bit better. It just sucks that by the 3rd film, they start repeating his arc again and again. So if we get both, that'd be my ideal way of it.
yeah,
I'd love both of those characters to have the young and older versions together, basically. That's how I'd look at it. If not, then it should be Patrick Stewart and then younger Fassbender, like there were rumors of happening in Multiverse of Madness in the first place. So, yeah, that's how I would look at that. I don't have to say his name, but I'm about to make a name for myself. I need to see Channing Tatum back as Gambit, especially because I don't think he'll ever be the mainline Gambit, but I think it'd be nice to have give him like a proper conclusion. I don't really need an Electro or anything, but I think it would be pretty funny if we get Ben Affleck's Daredevil, and then you see our Daredevil be like, "Who even are you? Like, like what are you? You're not me at all, right?" I like something meta like that, but um, yeah, I don't know. I don't mind Nick Cage, but I like his characterization in the second Ghost Rider a lot more than the first. Because the first one, he's just basically like Elvis, which was very confusing for me. But it's a tough one. I wouldn't mind the Gabriel Luna one, honestly, kind of popping up again. I think that'd be pretty solid. But uh, I think Ghost Rider is just better left alone, other than, like, something in the background, like, "Oh, here's a character that was running in the crowd and gets, like, some flames here and there," right? That's how I'd look at it. So, if anything, I'd actually like the Sam Elliott version, right? Riding on his horse, the dead horse, that'd be a lot cooler for me than main Ghost Riders. Yeah, but, I don't know. Outside of that, not much else. Everything that I've kinda wanted has kinda showed up, and, the only thing that'd be crazier is just they do, like, the crossover comics between Marvel and DC where you have, like, DC characters show up, but that requires a functioning DCU to happen first, so,
yeah.
yeah, that's not gonna ever happen anyways.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the good people have already all shown up.
Yeah.
I mean, we could bring back, the full Fox X-Men cast. Like, you could bring back Famke Janssen as Jean. You could bring back James Marsden as Scott. You could bring back who else is a big part of that series? Rogue. You can bring back all those characters, and I would be down with all that. But definitely my top would be Toby and Andrew. And then Hugh Jackman as well. I think Hugh Jackman's like kind of a lock. I don't think he's completely going out with Deadpool and Wolverine. I want them to transition away from him for the next Wolverine because he's been amazing, but you only have a limit really with him because he's in his
Yeah.
50s. So if you want a Wolverine for the next 20 years like Hugh Jackman played it, you need the next Wolverine. But I think Secret Wars would be the great place to transition because then you're going to do the mutants next. So put him in there. But yeah, I think anybody from First Class, that side of the universe, anything from the Fox X-Men universe, all would be cool. My goofy picks would for sure be like my top would be Nick Cage. I just would love to see that. I was excited in Flash when, spoiler, you see Nick Cage for like 1 second um as Superman. And I want to see him as Ghost Rider. Like that would just be so fun. I think that would be a wild, like everybody making fun of him. Like it would be so cool. The only reason it might not happen is just because it would be a character that modern audiences might not be as familiar with. So,
Yeah.
but if you wanted to reach into Sony, I don't think they would let you do this either. But if you wanted to reach into Sony and pull like Morbius or Madam Web or something,
No.
in, that would be hilarious.
No.
I would love to see what they did with that. I'd love to see Madam Web get like in a fight with with Tom Holland or something. Like that would be so stupid. It would be hilarious. That would be
Yeah.
awesome. um, in the exact terrible costume that she has at the end of the movie. That would be another a good one. But I'm like, the Punishers and stuff, they weren't as iconic. Maybe Dolph Lundgren as Punisher could be funny. Um, but they weren't as iconic. Maybe Hasselhoff as Nick Fury could be a good one that you could bring in.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of who else. Maybe the Captain America with like the fake ears from the 90s on his suit.
Just get me Japanese Spider-Man at this point.
Japanese Spider-Man, absolutely. There's so many like bad ones you could do. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I can't think of anybody else who's really great. Do you have a specific person that you want back? I know you said down there you have Wesley Snipes as Blade or Michael Fassbender as Magneto would be great to see if they can be in Avengers Secret Wars. Um, Yeah, do you have anybody else? Like, do you have anybody on the goofier side, the, like, dumber side of Marvel movies that you'd wanna see back? Because I mean, maybe a mouthless Deadpool, they could do some ridiculous things for sure. But we already have given mouthless Deadpool some credence in Deadpool 2, I think, so, that'll be interesting. Alright, well, we're gonna wrap it up here pretty soon. I'll take a couple more questions, and then we're gonna have to wrap up the stream for tonight, but this has been a lot of fun. I've wanted it to be a question-focused stream, and it has been, so thanks, guys, for pumping us in with questions and enjoying the stream altogether. Brandon says, oh, wait, no, that I skipped Anthony. Anthony says, "I know this question seems hard, but who's more powerful, full potential Anakin versus full potential Luke?" Well, I think on literally, it's not a tough question at all because if we're talking about hypotheticals and potentials, it's Anakin. Anakin's the
Yeah.
chosen one. So I think Anakin by a mile in any continuity. I don't care what Legends Luke did. Full potential of either one, it's Anakin. What we saw in Legends and what we saw in canon, I think what Luke became is more powerful than anything we've seen Anakin do as of yet. I think canon's going to make Anakin ultra powerful after he dies. So we'll see how that compares to like Legends Luke, but full potential easily Anakin.
Yeah. Yeah. Full potential Anakin wins it by a mile, like you said. Uh, Mortis stuff is gonna definitely evolve it further in the afterlife. My question now is like, what are we gonna do with him and how he's kind of depicted in Shadow of the Sith, right? Like he's in pain in the afterlife, right? Like he's stayed away clearly by from Kyla and all that, from Ben when he probably should have had like, hey, grand nephew, like that's not really who I am, you know. That's a little off. Here's who I really was before. And then the corruption that a lot of it was my fault, but definitely a lot of Palpatine influence and all this and that, right? We need an explanation for that. So I'm very curious how are they gonna bridge whatever we're doing right now with Filoni and what he's kind of exploring in Ahsoka, and then what we're gonna see eventually by the time we get into like proper sequel TV shows and stuff like that. So yeah, that'll be interesting. But I think that also leads us into Skywalker's Academy. I think you followed up his question, the super chat. Define the chosen one according to how you see Lucasfilm will take the story, I guess. And I see Dave continuing with Anakin working with the Living Force, Ahsoka, and possibly Luke in some senses not as strongly as Ahsoka through the world between worlds, guiding her to bring balance and become like the father for Mortis. He wouldn't take his place, but he might become a celestial. I doubt there would ever be a dark side son and light side daughter representation again because he'd show and guide them to be balanced as well. Yeah, I mean, I guess to that point, chosen one is definitely going to change. Like whatever's happening, in life for him, what could have been in life is definitely gonna be different than afterlife. Mortis was always a very interesting arc to kind of throw us into with the Clone Wars, just as like a one-off. But now that it's become the basis of a lot of stuff in Rebels, and now the entire show of Ahsoka, yeah, I am very curious, and that like I was saying before, I don't know what they're gonna do with Anakin. I do think he's gonna be ultra powerful, but I wouldn't be surprised if he actually defers it to Ahsoka. Like Ahsoka, you're the one that actually is more capable and like more true in spirit to this. And yeah, yes, he could become a celestial. I think that still will happen, but he needs to still be like in a position where he's able to physically feel pain as a force ghost when he shows up to Luke on Exegol and the visions and all that. So yeah, I that's my only thing. Like, yes, I wouldn't mind the chosen one prophecy kind of staying intact through him and then evolving further. I just think that it might be more tethered to where he is in the mortal plane and like some of
Mm.
his interesting abilities as opposed to like ascending to the position of father. I think he rejected that already. And now, especially after having witnessed and gone through everything, I don't really see him being like, "Yes, I'm so excited to be the father." If he is, it might just be a temporary custody before, like, an Ahsoka takes over.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting idea. I mean, with Filoni being in charge, it's most likely going to pass to Ahsoka.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to see how they handle that, especially with Ahsoka. Like, because we've all kind of theorized that if Ahsoka does become the daughter or does get involved with the Mortis stuff, that would kind of be a good way to end her story. But I don't think he wants to end her story anytime soon. So we'll see how that all shakes out here. And then Brandon followed up that with his pick for one of the goofiest characters that could make a reappearance in Secret Wars, Mr. Aziz, the pizza delivery guy from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. That would be a funny one. I'd love to see that back just because I would love to see Tobey Maguire say pizza time again. Like that would be awesome. If we're going there too, I'd love to see the guy who owns the apartments return because we know that at the end of the Spider-Man No Way Home, he gets the same apartment that Toby had in those movies, right? So let's see that guy, the Russian guy, return, and his daughter return in the that movie. That would be great. All right, so one last question. We'll take one more here. Where were we? We were at Anthony, and then I think it was Brandon. I'm trying to find where that was. Okay. Brandon, your fourth question. Should the Gentleman Show actor Harry Goodwin play the second most popular billionaire hero Green Arrow after showing his own interest in the character on his Instagram story? I don't know who that is because I haven't watched that show. So I have to look it up. But if he's a good actor, he can play the role. Let's see.
I do know who he is. I know the Gentleman Show is kind of like a semi spin-off of the Gentleman movie, so I have seen him in some other stuff, I don't remember what. Yeah, I mean, if he grows the hair and the goatee and the mustache, the
Oh
goatees and
wow.
mustache combo is kind of back in right now too, so if he gets a little bit of wavier hair in that, he can play very arrogant really well and very smug really well, so I wouldn't be opposed to it. I just am very curious how much of, like, the Arrowverse will, affect or maybe affect people's perceptions of Green Arrow. We've already seen kind of Hawkeye kinda get a little bit more closer to his comic book character evolution with his show and everything, and Kate Bishop to the act. You can bring him in, sure, but I don't know if he's gonna really stand out now in this post MCU landscape. You gotta really emphasize what makes him different, like his relationship with Black Canary and all that. So I could be down. I just don't see him being anything more than like a TV show character that like is like a small supporting character in like a movie.
Yeah, if we're talking about fan casts, I mean, it's hard to find a guy who looks more like Green Arrow than this guy does.
Yeah.
Um, I've never seen this guy before, but yeah, he literally looks like Ollie. Um, it's crazy. Wow. Yeah, so if he can do comedy, I mean, that's the big thing. And like you were mentioning, Sanak, I mean, the Arrowverse, I had a lot of fun with Arrow season 1 and 2. I watched Arrow through its fourth season and then fell off. That's when the third season was when they really started making no qualms about the fact that they were just a Batman show, but with Green Arrow. And then after that, it just kept getting more and more obvious that they did not care about being a Green Arrow show at all. And so I kind of fell off that show. I fell off all the CW stuff around that same time. So Flash season 3, Arrow season 5, I did not watch. Supergirl season 2. So I'm not too well versed in what they did with Arrow by the end, but I enjoyed the show. It was not close to what Green Arrow is like at all in any of the comic books. So I hope they go back to it. But yeah, he is the most quippy DC character, like, the most by far. I guess you could throw Wally in there when he becomes Flash, but if you're talking about just like the core Justice League, Green Arrow is by far the most quippy. So it needs to be somebody who's good at comedy, who can do that, who has that swagger. Oliver has that ability to just charm somebody, and I think that's the big difference between him and Bruce Wayne. And so you need to kind of capture that charm, that charisma. He's much more Tony Stark than he is Bruce Wayne, but he's even more charming than Tony Stark, where sometimes Tony Stark can be eccentric and mean. Oliver is not like that. So I'm hoping to see that. But yeah, this guy looks a lot like him. So good shout. I'm glad you you brought this guy to my attention. I've never heard of him. Harry Goodwins. Maybe he is going to be the next Oliver Queen. Brandon also says Stephen Amell was great as Green Arrow, like Grant Gustin's Flash and CW. I mean, I agree. He was great for the role they wrote. I thought he did a really good job. It's just not Green Arrow at all. So maybe by the end he became a little bit more like Green Arrow. But I did Grant Gustin's good as well. I don't think like there's a lot of die-hard Arrowverse people are like those versions are untouchable. They're not untouchable. Grant Gustin did a good job as Flash, but he did a good job as a TV show Flash. I think we can really reach beyond that for the movies. But thank you so much for watching our stream tonight, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. It was definitely a question-based stream. We did have a couple other topics I wanted to go over. Like Sanak mentioned, one of them with the new manga. Save it for next week if we don't have any other news. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. Subscribe for more content just like this. And make sure you join us next week for more content and more news and breakdowns here. We do actually, I completely forgot to mention this at the beginning. It's actually very important to the stream in the next few weeks. So I'm going on a trip out of town. I've been gone for a few weeks, and unfortunately, I have to leave on a Tuesday. So and I need to be in LA on a Monday. So that makes our stream a little difficult for next week. So let us know. I'm going to change it here in the poll so you guys can vote. And yeah, by the way, that poll was really, really close, surprisingly. And shockingly, I thought Never would win by a long shot. I thought there were more pessimistic people in our comment section here about Ray's movie, but 2028, 33%, but it was very close between 28 and 2027. I would be more with you guys on 2028. I think it's 2028 or 2029. I think 27 is very, very optimistic for the Ray movie, especially if Sean Levy's movie is the next one to come. I don't know, Sonic, do you have a thought on that final poll result? Do you think 2028 is what we're looking at
I
for
think
Ray's
28
movie?
is solid. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind back-to-back years with films, as long as they're both actively being developed now, right? And, like, we start seeing BTS pretty soon for each of them, but yeah, I don't know. It all really kinda depends on if they wanna just focus on finishing up, like, the New Republic era first, or if they're gonna do multiple time periods, like, I don't know. That's kinda where it lands for me, the question, like, if these films do get developed, Dawn of the Jedi kinda already has to be, but what about these other ones that are kinda like, will they, won't they, will they, won't they, right? So, if the restructure makes sense for them to do different eras and totally different spin-offs, go for it, but I think 28 is probably late 28, like a December release, I think I could see that.
Yeah, I think it's very possible for 28. If assuming George Nolfi is the next writer, if he's the last one they hire, they have plenty of time to make it happen by 2028, especially with other things in the pipeline. It's not like they're like desperate to get something out and they have the wiggle room. So hopefully they can do it by 28. But yeah, I think for me, I'm betting on 2029, just with the other projects that are coming as well, because it all even if this project does get going, I am still a little more confident in Sean Levy's movie and Dawn of the Jedi than I am here with its second slash third writer uh, getting completely off the ground. So it would be a surprise. It would mean they're further along than we think, but who knows? Maybe they will surprise us. So I put a poll up again, like I started to say earlier before I wanted to talk about the results of the poll. I'm going to be out of town next week, and I'm going to be out of town for a few weeks. So I won't be back. This will be in the next stream I am going to do is going to be one that we're probably going to do this weekend, and then I'll be out of town for a couple weeks. So we were going to do one this weekend to make up for the fact that I'm going to be gone a week from Tuesday today. So we won't be having a stream next Tuesday. That'll be for sure. Sonic will be on his own for the next few streams, so you'll have to keep an eye out to see when he figures out what time they're going up and all of that. But it should be business as usual. I would like to do a stream before I go though, so we're gonna do one this weekend. I've posted right there. Vote if you are somebody who usually comes to our streams. Vote there whether you prefer Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. I assume Saturday would be the day because Sunday is Super Bowl, and if you're an
Shit.
American, that's a pretty big day for most of us.
America.
The only thing I was hoping though is I don't. They haven't mentioned anything about Andor, but if there was a time to launch an Andor season 2 trailer, the Super Bowl would be a great time. So we'll see. Maybe they'll do something. We'll have a surprise Andor season 2 reveal for the Super Bowl. But yeah, let us know there. And then if you're watching on replay, comment. We'll plan on trying to figure out a time for Saturday. It'll probably be around the same time, but plan on Saturday for next week because there won't be a Tuesday one. Thank you so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody. Really appreciate it. Appreciate all the comments. Appreciate the discussion. Appreciate you guys always joining us for all these things. We really, really have a great time discussing all of this with you. Look forward to more content coming out. We have our next tier list coming out on Friday. If you guys are interested, it is our rankings of the Star Wars movie posters. So there's a lot of cool discussion around that. It was a fun topic, something pretty different. So check that out. We also have a lot of other videos coming out for you guys, as well as shorts every week, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and also polls every single day, twice a day, every day for you. So you can vote for your favorites of favorite Star Wars characters all time. Thank you so much for watching this stream, everybody, and we will see you all next time.